What is up, everyone? This is Jacob Minnick, host of Behavioral Health Integration Podcast. Today, I am super excited to be doing a show on AI, artificial intelligence therapy, with two awesome, amazing returning special guests, Benjamin Caldwell and Kevin Doyle. Gentlemen, again, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Jacob, for having us. It's good to be back with you and excited to talk about the topic.
Thanks, Ben. Thanks, Jacob. Glad to be here and looking forward to it as well.
Yeah. Well, since it has been a little while, would you gentlemen like to take this opportunity to discuss what's been going on with you since we've last met over a year ago? Anything new?
Go ahead, Ben.
Yeah, so we're here talking about AI today. I've got some articles on the role of AI in therapy up at my blog at psychotherapynotes.com. In terms of the other stuff I've been doing with my sort of professional life, my company that does continuing ed and test prep kind of stuff, we just put out some new software for people's practice exams that they take with us that gives really advanced reporting on their test taking skills in addition to the actual knowledge that they display on their exam attempts. There's increasing evidence, and this has been known for a while, but there's some pretty strong recent evidence about the key role of test taking skills in passing license exams. So I'm really excited about that new software. I think it's a game changer in the test prep world.
Nice.
I just made a note to follow up with you, Ben, because that's something we're interested in. So you never know where these conversations will lead. So we'll double back offline on that. Few things on our end. I can't believe it's been a year since we spoke last, but glad to be reconnecting with you guys. I would say two things for us here. I'm the president of the Hazel and Betty Ford Graduate School, and we have had a really strong year and really pleased to welcome 59 new degree seeking students this fall compared to 37 last fall. So really nice growth, over 50% growth year over year for the entire calendar years 23 to 24. So at a time when higher ed is in a really kind of time of turmoil, we seem to be not just surviving but thriving, and really pleased about that. And many people ask me, what are different metrics that are important to you? And really one of the most important metrics is the number 105,000 or so, which is the number of overdose deaths in this country, and knowing that each year. And so knowing that the workforce is part of the solution to that, that we can make a contribution is really encouraging. So that's really important. We achieved our CACREP accreditation, which is the leading counselor education accrediting body. That happened in January. So really pleased about that. And then lastly, and this may be a conversation for another day, Jacob, but I doubt I mentioned this last year, but our faculty started a pilot program where we would consider for admission students who don't have a bachelor's degree, but can demonstrate readiness for master's level work based on work experience, essentially. And we've decided to continue that. And so about 20 or so of that 59 who came in this fall are folks who are using a combination of academic training, associate's degrees or credits, plus work experience to satisfy our faculty that, yes, you can handle master's level work. And again, from a workforce perspective, I think we need to think more creatively than we have in the past. And so it's kind of an exciting thing.
Amen.
Yeah, Kevin, congratulations on the CACREP accreditation. That is no small feat.
Thank you. It was years in the making, and this is the second institution where I've worked with where we've done this, and I said that's the last time I'm doing it. So, yeah, really pleased. So thank you for that.
That's awesome. It really is. So again, I'm super excited, and as we talked before, so I'm a clinician in private practice, so I have my own feelings regarding AI therapy. And just to kick it off, so technically AI therapy has been around for, I guess, 10 to 20 years. Is that true? In a sense?
Yeah, I mean, part of it depends on how you define artificial intelligence. And this is one of those areas where I think a lot of clinicians get understandably fuzzy about, like, what is this exactly that we're talking about? And is it just sort of advanced computing? And I think it's important to start from a working knowledge of what is AI, because you're exactly right, Jacob. AI therapy has been around in some forms for actually quite a while. And the sort of conceptual way that I try to describe AI it's technically imperfect. So folks who are in like the data and development world, please understand. I understand the weaknesses here, but just as a conceptual framework, sort of typical computing means that you take a big set of data and you process it through some predefined rules to get some outcomes that you're seeking, something you're interested in knowing from that data. And what makes artificial intelligence qualitatively different is that it takes those last two steps, the rules and the outcomes, and it flips them. It takes a big data set and tells the computer essentially, here are the outcomes. You decide what the rules are that get us to these particular outcomes, and then kind of carry those rules that you have found forward. And this is what we talk about with training AI. It's basically giving AI a big data set and a big set of outcomes and saying, the rules that get us from point A to point B, we're not going to predetermine. That is up to you. And in artificial intelligence systems, they can also adjust those rules as more data, more outcomes are coming in. Now, you can, of course, put guardrails around AI systems, but I think it's helpful to have that conceptual framework first to understand this really is something meaningfully different from just really advanced, fast computers. It's a different thing. And with that in mind, yeah, AI-based therapy, depending on how you want to define it, has been around for some time in various forms. And the landscape today is one where AI therapy is happening right now in various forms, not just in other parts of the world, but in the US. I've just started seeing some ads for this in like my social media feeds. AI therapy for as little as $1 a session.
Wow.
This is a current part of the mental health care landscape. And as I know we're going to talk about, it's in the interests of policymakers, of insurance and other payers, and in many cases of clients for AI therapy to be made widely available at low cost. So that all of us as providers then have to figure out how do we want to position ourselves in that kind of a very different mental health landscape.
And I'm sure I'll learn a lot from Ben as we go through this conversation. But I would add a couple things that was really helpful to me, Ben. So thanks for that. In the higher education space, of course, people think about AI and from plagiarism risk. Will students not do the work to learn certain things? And that's a legitimate question. It's a fair question. It's something we need to think about. On the other hand, whenever a new platform, a new resource becomes available, there's always that hesitation. And I sometimes think about Google as a form of AI. You can punch a term into a search engine and all of a sudden all this information comes up. Whereas when some of us were in school, you had to go to these databases and read journal articles and things, and it streamlines your work and makes the work more efficient. And so we need to be careful not to overreact and reject something that can be an extraordinarily helpful tool. And so the question is how to use these things responsibly. So in the academic environment, there are ways to utilize this, I think. I don't know that we know all of them yet, and what all Ben used a great term, which was guardrails. What are these guardrails going to look like? And how do we make sure that the people we're training have the right tools to do the work, but are using resources like artificial intelligence or Google for that matter? I mean, remember when Wikipedia was new and there was overreaction like this is going to be awful? Well, I use Wikipedia every so often when I just want a quick source of information about something. It's not the same as a peer-reviewed, journal article. But so I think we have to just, to me, openness to new technologies is the key attitude with which to approach this, and then finding out what are the right guardrails to protect people.
Very good. Yeah, I know for me as a therapist right now, so I have Zoom for my telehealth sessions, and they just started, I don't know, it's been maybe a few weeks with a new AI program where you click the AI button, and as you're talking to the client, and when the session's done, they give you a little progress report of like what you said, you and the client. Now, yes, you may look at this and be like, oh, great, time management, just copy and paste. Yes and no. Yes, you can kind of use it for like time management, but you actually have to look and read. And it does say that on the bottom, do not use this at 100% clarification, because not everything is said is true. And my God, that is true. Because when you actually read it, maybe 75% of it's true, but it's just totally misleading on what the clinician and client were actually saying to each other. So again, to all the clinicians out there, yes, you can use this, but again, be really careful about what you actually put in your notes, because AI does not catch everything, and it does not understand your expressions of what you're saying to the client, and it just misuses words. So again, be really careful again what you put on your notes if you are going to use the AI system. So.
Well, I think that's a great point. When you look at the AI systems that therapists tend to be more familiar with right now, they're usually those systems that operate as kind of an administrative assistant, right? So they're helping with things like documentation. Last I looked, there were already more than a dozen different companies that are offering some form of an AI platform to draft your progress notes for you. Part of the challenge in this conversation is that not all of those systems work in the same way. They utilize different levels of protected health information. Some of them record sessions to generate that first draft of a progress note, others don't. So when we look at things like HIPAA compliance, just as an example, well, it's not going to be the same math for every one of those systems. But what they all do is they use AI in some form to generate a first draft of a progress note for you. And to your point, Jacob, yeah, you have to read that progress note diligently and make sure that it really does match what happened in your session. But a lot of these systems are going to continue to get smarter, to continue to learn from the corrections that therapists make to that first draft, so that the next time around, it's not a correction that you'll need to make. It's something that the system will do automatically. And that's kind of the idea with all these, is they get better over time. I talked not long ago with a pretty big employer in California, larger kind of mental health system, and they were preparing to move their entire system over to AI documentation. And as I was talking with one of the leaders there, she was explaining that, part of this was about the time savings. And that's always what I had heard as sort of the main selling point for these systems. You get back 3 minutes from each progress note that, now takes you 5 minutes instead of 8. Well, over the course of a year, maybe you're doing 1,000 sessions. That's 3,000 minutes that you have saved. And if my math is right, I think that adds up to 50 hours. Like, you're getting a whole work week back in time you can move to other stuff. And that's huge for a lot of clinicians. But what was interesting was that for this employer, this system, they were saying that the big selling point for them wasn't so much the time savings, but the dollar savings that were going to result from the consistency and quality of the documentation. They, like a lot of other big employers for mental health systems, they struggle with getting human therapists to do documentation in a way that is timely, thorough, and will stand up to an audit from an insurer or a payer. And so they have to deal with clawbacks from insurers and other payers every so often. And they looked into a whole bunch of different AI systems, and where they landed was they would more than make back what they spend on this AI documentation system in fewer clawbacks from insurers and other payers, because the documentation that is drafted by AI tends to be better and more consistent in its quality than the documentation from human therapists. And I find that just fascinating.
Yeah, really interesting stuff. So two things that I would add. One is really, I think Ben touched on it, which is the question sometimes is, what will the quality of the documentation be? Will it be as good as a human being? We have to remain open to the possibility that it might be better. I mean, what clinician loves documentation? And if you're sort of half distracted and you're not invested in doing it anyway, I don't know that you could say you're going to be giving your best work. It's sort of a necessary evil. And so if the AI technology can improve while saving time, my goodness, I mean, it's a godsend. The other thing I would say, and I would cite the source. I just can't remember where I was reading this, so I can't do that. But I think that what we have to be careful about is those ethical, reputable places that will find that time saving that Ben was referring to and use that to the advantage of the clinician. In other words, now you can get a break in between your sessions. You can take a breath. You can use the restroom. You can walk around. I mean, burnout and stress are very real. And sometimes you just see more and more and more expected from clinicians, and people leave. The turnover rate in our profession is really bad, really high. So if you can save those 3 minutes, and it doesn't just translate into now you can see more clients, now you can generate more billable hours. That's what I think we have to be careful about, because then clinicians will be under even more stress, saying with those, what did you say it was, then 50 hours of the year or something,
Yeah.
whatever that number is, don't translate that into that many more billable patient hours for the owner of the practice or for the company. So find some shared benefit that the provider can realize, but also the provider, the company, let's say, but also the clinician who can take a deep breath and say, I can have a few moments between sessions now to regroup. So and as I said, the reputable, ethical places will do that. The profit motive only folks might say, great, more productivity, squeezing more juice out of the orange. So,
Yeah, and I'm sure we'll end up seeing some mix of both of those. With any technology, and you alluded to this earlier, there's always the promise that comes with it and the potential for misuse. And we have some of these same conversations around any new emerging technology in the world around us. I remember when it was still controversial whether therapists should be allowed to or able to email their clients. As cell phones were really taking off in sort of being commonplace among the general population, we had conversations about, well, what about privacy on cell phone conversations with clients? And there is, I think, a very good, healthy back and forth about we want to be able to utilize this technology in a way that does not increase risk to clients. And some of that discussion is happening now around AI. I think part of my concern with AI is that we're having these conversations around documentation, as we should, when AI therapy is already out there. And I wonder whether the professional organizations, the ones who are setting ethical standards here, as well as policymakers who are setting legal standards, I wonder whether we're going to be playing catch up in a very rapidly approaching time when AI therapy is commonplace.
Well, and I would say I don't wonder about that. I know that we will be playing catch up. And not that I'm the know-it-all, but you're asking the right question, Ben. And so, in the world, some of the worlds that I live in, accrediting bodies. Well, accreditation standards tend to have a lag time of several years between, they're still dealing with Facebook. What do we do about that? So the standards of practice, the codes of ethics of the major professional associations are usually several years behind what we're really dealing with. And so most practitioners, whether it be marriage and family therapists, counselors, psychologists, social workers, look to their codes of ethics for guidance and say it's not there. There's not much in AI, related to AI. American Counseling Association's Code of Ethics is now nearly 10 years old. There's some stuff about social media, but my recollection is certainly nothing that uses the phrase artificial intelligence. And so there is going to be a delay in accreditation standards, codes of ethics, in the training environment that I live in, the education environment. There's not much guidance about what our curricula are expected to reflect around these kinds of things. It takes years. And so to Ben's point, we know there will be a delay. And so then clinicians are sort of on their own to try and figure this stuff out. And so we do a disservice because of that. But these bodies are unwieldy in staying current. And they get current, but when we have this conversation 5 years from now, we'll say, remember that talk we had about AI 5 years ago? It's all out of date, and as Ben said, we were talking about documentation, but what about the therapy itself being delivered, by artificial intelligence as opposed to a human, which is, such a strange thought, but that's where it seems to be headed.
Well, and just to illustrate your point, Kevin, so we all, the world of mental health care turned on a dime in March of 2020, right? When COVID hit, we moved almost all of what had been in-person care online. And we actually did it remarkably well. There's research coming out to this day about how well we did with what researchers call conversion rates, moving people from that in-person environment to online. And there wasn't, to the best of my knowledge, any kind of a spike in like malpractice lawsuits or licensing board complaints related to that transition. We actually made that transition pretty effectively and by all appearances, pretty responsibly. And more than 3 years later, in July of 2023, this new requirement takes effect in California that all licensed providers and any folks entering into the mental health professions, at least at the master's level, need to take 3 hours of training in telehealth-based care. And I'm a provider who delivers that training, and I want to make it really worthwhile to people. But always at the beginning, I say, let's just have a collective laugh at the fact that this is now a training requirement for a thing that we have all been doing pretty darn responsibly for, now it's mid to late 2024, for more than 4 years. And so to come back now and say, well, let's just make sure that you know what the rules are. I think we did. I think we were good on that.
If I could use one more example, Jacob, and cut me off anyway. Ben's doing great, but cut me off if you have other questions you really want to get to. But one example that comes to mind for me is concurrent documentation. When that became a thing, we all said, "You mean the person's going to be doing their note taking or record keeping during the session? That's going to be awful," And I was probably one of those who said that. And I recently had a medical appointment where the physician was doing that. He, in this case was was fully attentive to me, was pulling up charts on his computer screen to show me, here's what I'm talking about. And he was using this technology very respectfully, very appropriately. He was not staring at his screen the whole time, ignoring me. Point being that with anything, the learning curve kicks in and we get better at these things. And I felt like it was an extraordinarily valuable session because I got to visually see some of the things that he was trying to explain. He was documenting in real time, So of course he didn't have to remember at the end of his workday, was that guy that I'd said this to? It was all done concurrently. And now we probably wouldn't have been as good at that, when he did it for the first time. So I think that was an example of this type of technology, not exactly AI, but, the similar process that was used very effectively.
Very nice. So now, moving on, as I said before, like I'm a clinician in private practice, and again, I will promise to be as even keel as I possibly can, but because I just feel like we have a lot of different great points of view here, where I'm sure all of us know why clinicians can be struggling nowadays, just with health insurance companies, getting on the providers list. I mean, the list goes on and on. So I feel like I got some good topics. And again, Ben, thank you for your articles. They were really, really good, combined with some other videos that I watched. And again, I'm going to get into various pros and cons, and I feel like we can have a lot of great conversations. Which is, I'm conflicted because it's so bad, because a lot of the pros for like clients tend to be cons in a lot of these articles, and why it'd be better for them to leave us to go to AI therapy. But again, I will do my best to see both sides of the story. But a lot of things I know, especially Ben, you mentioned earlier, cheaper cost. That scares the hell out of me, because I think in one of your articles, the insurance companies are more prone to go to this because they're going to be saving millions of dollars, right? Rather than go to human therapists. Is that true?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So just as a kind of parallel example, there's a company called Hippocratic AI, and they offer hospitals and other large healthcare systems the services of their AI nurses to do some sort of common tasks that nurses do, like instructing patients on how to do an injection, for example. And they have gone to these hospitals and other big systems and offered the services of their AI nurses for $9 an hour. And they've got some research suggesting that the AI nurses, in a lot of contexts, do their jobs just as well as human nurses. And if you're a hospital or another kind of big healthcare system, that's awfully appealing. There was even one kind of sales deck that Hippocratic had that they took offline after they got some negative media attention for it. But they were directly comparing their $9 an hour AI nurses with $90 an hour human nurses. And you can think about the similar kind of comparison for psychotherapists, right? If you take a human psychotherapist that is maybe under an insurance contract that's paying them $90 a session, you can replace that provider with an AI therapist who costs maybe 1/10 of that. Well, even if making AI available were to mean that a lot more people start accessing mental health care through the AI system, that still would represent a huge overall cost savings for the insurer. And while, of course, it's easy to demonize insurance companies and say, well, they're all about the money, and so of course they're going to like this, I also like to point out another big benefit for insurers, which is not so much their fault. There simply aren't enough mental health providers. We know that we have a huge shortage of mental health providers in the US, and insurance companies really struggle with this. They simply can't get enough providers into their networks to meet the needs that exist today. And some of that you can argue is about insurance reimbursement rates and other shenanigans, and that's fine. And I tend to agree that that is part of the problem. But there just simply aren't enough of us. There are not enough providers. And if you're an insurance company and you're struggling with this concept that regulators call network adequacy, you don't have enough therapists to meet the need in your system. Well, AI suddenly looks like the magical solution to this problem. California has fined insurers many millions of dollars over the years over network adequacy and timeliness of service concerns. And if I'm an insurance company and I see this AI system that, even if I don't look at it as a replacement for a human therapist, but as more of like a stopgap, a way to send people for a little bit of extra support, either between sessions or until they can get connected with a human therapist, some of those people are not going to wind up accessing human therapists in the network. They're going to find the AI to be good enough to give them the support that they need to get through whatever's happening at the moment. That can very, very quickly solve my network adequacy headaches. Now, there are other solutions to network adequacy and the provider shortage in general. I am a big proponent of the idea that what we really ought to be looking at is getting rid of clinical exams for licensure, because there are a lot of people in clinical exam purgatory who meet all the other requirements for licensure, aside from this clinical exam that proves nothing and has wildly disparate outcomes on the basis of race and ethnicity. Separate conversation, but it's just to say there are other solutions to the network adequacy problem other than AI. But if I'm an insurance company, I'm looking very favorably on AI. And similarly for policymakers, they also are concerned that there aren't enough therapists to meet the need. They want to be able to say, look, we've solved this problem by getting more people connected with mental health services. AI looks like a not perfect, but good enough solution.
I'm really with you on the clinical exams question, Ben. And as you said, maybe that's a year from now, our third conversation. But
I would love that.
We're just there's a book. I don't know if either of you have heard about this or any of the listeners to the podcast have, that has really kind of taken the higher ed world by storm. And it's called Whatever It Is, I'm Against It. And it speaks to the resistance to change. And higher ed has it more than almost anywhere else. But, to Ben's point, and that's really what we're talking about today, is resistance to change, even if change is better. What do you mean we won't have licensing exams? Well, Ben, you can probably speak to this more than I can, but I know that many of the licensing exams that I took really valued memorization. That happens to be something that I'm good at, but that doesn't make me a good clinician, especially now when you can look anything up right at your fingertips. Like physicians, it's good for them, I'm sure, to know that a certain drug interacts with another drug. But there are hundreds and hundreds of drugs. You can't know all the drug interactions. So you put it into your computer or the app or whatever, and it kicks it out, and you get the right answer rather than what you think is right. all these things are examples of change that is either coming or is already here, and there's still resistance because of the fear of the unknown, and these vague exceptions. But what if, and ignoring all of the things. I sense maybe from you, Jacob, do worry about what about what does the human bring to this interaction as a counselor or therapist, and how we'll replicate that. But ultimately, and payers have a lot to say about it, as Ben was talking about network adequacy. But ultimately, I would hope that the individual patient or client have some choice, some freedom to say, just like people now are choosing in-person versus telehealth, there are some folks who really want in-person, and hopefully the payer will remain open to that. And that's where I think adequacy is one word, but advocacy is another. And so, what does your payer approve, and will there still be options for in-person therapy for people who just really want to do that? And some of that's going to be correlated with age. I would think that older patients and clients would just prefer to be with I may be wrong, but I would think that you might see that. Whereas younger people, the other part of this is access, and Ben alluded to this earlier. If we're able to see people who otherwise wouldn't have been seen, we have an ethical responsibility to be open to that.
Yeah, absolutely. And to your point about the possibility of preferences going in different directions, I certainly see that in that you've got younger folks who are generally a little more comfortable with technology, might be more willing to talk with an AI therapist. I think we're all in agreement that in-person therapy, it's not like that's going to go away. There are too many people who believe very strongly, as I do, in the importance and the healing power of that human-to-human connection. And some of the criticism of AI therapy is that an AI therapist cannot act as a moral agent. It doesn't have the same centeredness that human therapists do. And those are all legitimate criticisms that will keep people coming to in-person therapy. At the same time, I think a lot of us as clinicians sort of dismiss the potential benefits to clients of AI therapy because we have so much invested in the healing power of the human relationship. And while I would be first in line to shout from the rooftops, it's not the same. AI therapy is not, and I think cannot be, the same as a human therapeutic relationship. I think we risk underestimating the number of clients for whom it'll be close enough. We don't have great research on this yet, but there was one study came out of Turkey a couple of years ago looking at people's preferences related to AI-based therapy versus human-based therapy. And more than half of the people in the study said that they would prefer meeting with an AI therapist over a human one. And that group of people who preferred the AI therapist, there was even a subset in there of people who trusted human therapists more than AI when it came to data privacy, and still would rather meet with the AI therapist anyway. Because there are advantages to the client that go beyond just cost. There's immediacy of access, the idea that an AI therapist will be on demand 24/7, never tired, never bothered that you want an appointment right then. They will perfectly remember everything that you ever told them. And perhaps most importantly to the client, an AI therapist is incapable of judging you. And so people talk about the discomfort that they feel when sharing some embarrassing or shameful part of themselves with a human therapist, and how with an AI therapist, they just don't have to worry about that. It makes it more comfortable for them. I think we as human therapists, for as much as we approach clients in this non-judgmental, very accepting kind of stance, clients don't always know that or trust that going in. And it's easy for us to assume that clients just know that. Like, of course you're going to be accepted here. Of course I'm going to take you as you are. And it's my role, my job to be on your side. But for a client who doesn't know that coming in, and they have to decide between a human therapist who's not always available and is much more expensive, versus an AI therapist who it's not going to be the same, might not be as good, but is always available, lower cost, and incapable of judging you. Man, that AI therapist starts to look pretty good.
That's extraordinarily compelling, Ben. And I hadn't thought of all of those things, especially the judgmental part of it, because I think of all the things that I've heard clients and patients say over the years, and working specifically in substance use, this is really profound or prominent. The fear of being judged is really high up there among the concerns that people have, and the hesitation. It may take months or years before somebody feels comfortable revealing a certain thing because of that fear. You've mentioned a couple of other things though that are very real, and now some of these are arguments as well for telehealth or teletherapy, like when you talk about the barriers to people getting help, all the time spent in commuting to the therapist's office. Now telehealth solves that too. So let's say it's half hour each way, parking, costs associated with all of those things. Those are very real things that people say, well, where's your office and where am I going to park and all that weather, I don't want to go out in this weather. And then you get into all the therapeutic things about people just feeling more comfortable in their own homes. And that the teletherapy solves all that, or most of that, but it doesn't solve the time of day issue, and time zone stuff, So I know, I mean, I've looked at schedules for day treatment programs. Well, people with substance use issues, most of whom are employed, you can't find an outpatient treatment program that has weekend hours. Well, that's when they do an overrepresentation of their drinking and using, but they're not open on Saturdays or Sundays, whereas your AI, therapy could be. So very, very practical, simple things like that, which we can't solve. And Ben, you were right to say, well, we actually could solve them because COVID showed us we can. So we sort of choose not to, because good luck finding a workforce that wants to work, every Saturday. But
exactly.
But
one of the companies that's doing AI therapy is a company called Woebot, WOEBOT Health. And in the materials that they have published, and just to be clear, not an endorsement, I have no ties to the company or anything like that, but in the materials that they have published, they mention that the usage of their platform tends to spike between 8 p.m. and 11 p.m. And that's the time of day when people might have the most acute need to speak with a therapist and the greatest difficulty in accessing a human therapist.
And as therapists, we're shunned for seeing people at that time because there are boundary issues. You never see a client past 6. It's very inappropriate of you. Don't ever do it. But that just proves that's not always the case. And
if you did, your practice would be booming.
Yeah. I actually, here in LA, I knew a therapist a few years ago who her practice hours were from like 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. because she knew that there were people who did shift work who needed care and really could not get it anyplace else. And I'll tell you, she had a very, very successful practice doing that because there is so much need at that time and such difficulty accessing care. And AI promises to remove that very critical barrier.
And can I say, the expression of I'm not judging her. It's just I don't know what to feel because I grew up in this field saying that's big no. You're going to get kicked out of the field. That's inappropriate. You're going to get a bad reputation. You never talk to a client at 1 a.m. or 11 o'clock at night. So I don't agree with that. But now you're obviously I'm learning that's not a bad thing. In a sense.
Well, and in this particular case, this was somebody who was not, her practice wasn't built on those clients who are out partying at 1 a.m. Her practice was built on those clients who work at 1, that's their work day, or that was the only time that they had available because they were traveling. And then, of course, there's all the state line stuff that AI also promises to fix because it's regulated at the federal level. But people who, that was just the nature of their lives, that they tended to be up doing their lives in what is, for most of us, the middle of the night. So this actually wasn't crisis work predominantly that she was doing. It was what you and I would think of as routine outpatient mental health care, just at a time when her competition was non-existent because they were all sleeping.
That's smart business. I grew up in an era where halfway houses were a big part of the substance use landscape, and they still, to some degree, are. But many of them had models where the residents would wake up in the morning, and their expectation was you're out of the house from 8 to 5 working. Well, the old 9 to 5 workforce, is what you're alluding to, Ben, is a thing of the past. And in fact, for someone with a substance use disorder who may not have a great education, they're going to be getting evening shift work, overnight shift work. The 9 to 5s are for the people with, graduate degrees, and those are the choice shifts. And so to have them be out of the house during the day, but their work was on a completely different schedule, is just really out of touch. And so it's just it's not that long ago where stores were not open 24/7. All of that has changed. So that person you're describing, Ben, what a brilliant business person. My goodness. And yet you're right, Jacob. You could see someone filing a complaint to a licensing board, which I hope would be dismissed.
I could definitely. We're so over policed in this field. I could actually definitely see that. I could definitely see it in Minnesota, anyways. I'm not sure what it's like in other states, but definitely. Again, it's just the way I grew up in this field. I know we're kind of like this. If you want to use the word petty, yeah, we are very petty.
Well, you could put a lot of that too under, as Kevin was saying earlier, kind of resistance to change and resistance to the adoption of new technologies and new frameworks. And don't get me wrong, I think that part of that is healthy, but certainly when you take an idea, I like the title of that book. I got to look into that. Whatever it is, I'm against it. You take a framework like that, and it slows down our ability to help clients in ways that the clients would really like and appreciate and also benefit from. In the sort of training world, there are companies that I could go to right now, and I could go into a studio and they will do voice capture, motion capture. They'll do some 3D modeling to capture how I do different facial expressions, and they can create an avatar of me. It's me, my voice, my expressions, my movement, and then I can give it a script to have the avatar read, and I could use that as like my video training, and it would look and feel like me to the audience, and it would never require a second take. Now, I see that in the training world. It's obviously a very short walk to put that into the therapy world, where the words are being generated by AI, but the expressions, the face, the movement, that all looks like a real therapist. I or some version of me could theoretically be practicing with 100 clients at the same time within this kind of a framework.
Well,
and
Sorry,
go ahead.
Jacob's got the avatar right on our screen. It's going to be that avatar we're looking at right now. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Ben, but I was just chuckling as you said that we're already looking at it, But at the same time, I hadn't even thought about that, Wow.
Well, and I also want to bring this up because I don't want to get too far off topic. We're talking about therapists and AI. Could professors at colleges be replaced for AI? Like you just said, lesson plan, facial structure.
Well, and you can do that right now today, and you'll know. Somebody taking a course with an avatar like that would know within a couple of minutes, oh, this is AI. This isn't quite real. Because the technology, even though it's in wide utilization, companies like Wobot and Wyza and a bunch of others, they've done millions of sessions of therapy already. This is something that exists right now today. And looking at the videos in the training world, you might say, well, it's not quite realistic. It's not quite human enough. It's very much in that uncanny valley stage of development. And I think back to, you remember that movie Polar Express with Tom Hanks? That was very kind of early relative to now in the development of these kinds of technologies for movie making. And people talked about the Tom Hanks character in Polar Express and the other characters as well as being sort of wooden and real enough to be creepy, but not quite real enough to be mistaken for human beings. And I still like that movie. My family watches it to this day, and we like it around the holidays each year. But it was a stage of development of that kind of technology. And I think for a lot of therapists today looking at AI therapy, they see AI therapy as that. They see it as in the uncanny valley, very clearly not human. And I think a lot of therapists then dismiss it as, well, I don't need to really worry about it. It's too far off in the future. But I just want to point out how short of a walk it is from a historical perspective, from Tom Hanks in Polar Express being wooden and maybe a little creepy, to where we are now with the very realistic and believable de-aging of Indiana Jones. It's a short walk. And I'm not sure therapists are prepared for how short that walk is going to be in AI technology applied to therapy.
That's great stuff. That's the crazy thing. I still have so much more ideas to get into, but however, I know we're kind of running out of time. I so badly want to do a part 2, but as we close things off, I guess if you gentlemen want to give out your contact information, just in case any of my audience members want to get a hold of you, send you a message, that'd be great. And
Kevin, go ahead.
Sure. Well, I would refer people to the website for our school, hazeldenbetty4.edu. My contact directly, kdoyle@hazeldenbetty4.edu is the easiest way to reach me.
And for me, my company's website is highpass, highpass.com. That's where you can find our CE stuff, our training stuff, exam prep, that kind of thing. And the articles that Jacob, you were so kind to mention earlier, articles that I have written on AI are up at my blog, which is at psychotherapynotes.com.
that's awesome. And I will make sure all the information that will be on my show notes. So it'll be one click away. Again, gentlemen, it's always a great pleasure having you on the show. It was awesome.
Thank you, Jacob. Thank you, Kevin. Always good to talk to you both.
Likewise.
Yeah.